recording it. And get going here.
Did they sign the releases?
No, I've never disclosed it. Anyway, we went through this last time, and I'll go ahead and read the verses that we covered last time. Basically, just to summarize, man, my phone is going nuts. But basically, to summarize where we've been on this is that if you go to Daniel chapter 8, is actually a prophecy that he sees during the Babylonian Empire. He's still in the Babylonian Empire, but he is in the citadel of Susa in his service there, which is in the future Medo-Persian Empire. And he has a vision while he's in the citadel. And he's over here at this canal called the Ulai Canal. And he sees a goat and a ram, and they both basically represent two kingdoms that are coming. One is the Medo-Persian Empire, which is going to become dominant and actually defeat the Babylonians. And then after that, the Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great, who is represented by the one long horn, who is going to come and defeat the Medo-Persian Empire. And during that time, there's going to be something that's going to happen in Jerusalem, where a ruler after Alexander the Great is going to persecute the Jews, but also desecrate the temple. And but eventually that horn, who we call a little horn, is going to be defeated or actually killed by God. God's actually going to cause his death, and then the temple is going to be restored. That's the way that things happened under Antiochus Epiphanes. So we'll get into all that and kind of recap a little bit where we were as we go along. Okay. So anyway, verses 1 through 4. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in the Susa of the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing in the bank on the bank of the canal. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the other one came up last. So the first horn that comes up is actually the king of the Medes, the kingdom of the Medes, and then the second one is the Persians, and the Persians actually become dominant in that kingdom. So the Medes today are the Kurds. So even today, you have Persians, Iranians, basically, but the Kurds come from the Medes. That was a unified empire at one time, right after the Babylonian Empire. So this is represented by these two horns. One horn becomes more dominant than the other. And both horns are high, but one was smaller than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. So this is coming out from the area of Iran, and then going up into where Israel is, and up into modern day Turkey and down to Egypt. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue him from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. And as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west. So this is going to be the Grecian Empire. And it came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes, which is Alexander the Great. He came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him with his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and when he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. I kind of highlighted this idea of casting down. There's a lot of casting down in this passage. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came four conspicuous horns towards the four winds of heaven. So Alexander the Great died, and he died of, I guess, some mysterious circumstances. But he had promised that if he promised his kingdom to the strongest, and what happened was that four of his generals sort of jostled for position. There's a little bit of, it's a little bit more complicated than that. You have a little bit of back and forth, but you end up basically with four empires that come from this. So up here you have Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. And with Israel, where it concerns Israelists, they kind of ended up close to the border between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire down at the bottom. So their relationship with the Ptolemies, it wasn't always great, but it was better than it ended up being with the Seleucids. But they fell under the Ptolemies first. And it's actually how it's part of the story of how the Hebrew Bible got translated into Greek, because Ptolemy had his library in Egypt, in Alexandria, and he wanted all of the Hebrew Bible basically to be translated into Greek to put in his library. And so the Septuagint became sort of the official version. In fact, you in a synagogue, you could not use Aramaic. You could use Hebrew, but hardly anybody knew Hebrew. And so it became kind of the standard around Judea and for the Jews to use the Septuagint. And the Septuagint is what Jesus uses and what Paul uses and cites from. The New Testament writers use mostly the Septuagint, but that's because of the Ptolemies. The Seleucids, they defeated, they defeated the Ptolemies in Israel. And in Israel, they even wanted to be under the Seleucids because there were some things they didn't like about whoever was in charge of that in the Ptolemies at the time. And but it ended up being really bad news, especially when it comes to the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, who ruled the Seleucid Empire for a while. So Antiochus IV Epiphanes, this is the person who ends up destroying the temple. Out of one of the four horns that that grew on the ram, right, came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south. So as we saw, it expanded downwards towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land, which is Israel. It grew great, and even to the host of heaven. We think of the host of heaven strictly in terms of angels, but there's sort of an overlap when we talk about hosts of heaven, rulers, authorities, kings, those sorts of things, and even stars, that those can refer to people as well. We're talking about leadership that could be on the ground or in the heavens. And so, and I kind of like it makes the distinction a little bit hazy, and it can be a little bit confusing. But on the other hand, if you're looking at things from like the spiritual point of view, you are seeing things that sort of like behind the scenes, things that you wouldn't necessarily see in history with the spiritual host, so to speak. But then you also have terminology that uses celestial or heaven language for human hosts or for human leadership, so to speak. So even like the priesthood, it's kind of the same way that when what's his name, Joseph has that dream about the sun and moon, 11 stars. You know, he is thinking about his mother and father and his 11 brothers. And this language gets repeated in Revelation, the star language. And then on the other hand, you have elsewhere in Daniel, you have language like the Prince of Persia, which is apparently an angelic host or a fallen angel, right? So you have the you have a we could, I'm not going to get all into why that is, but basically they kind of are almost treated in the same sort of categories. And some of the host of the stars, it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It's talking about, he's talking here about so the high priest was trampled down, and there was a lot of priests that he killed. Again, you're looking at that star language here. It became great as the prince of the host, who was the Onias, and I'll get into Onias the high priest, who was replaced by Jason. It's kind of important, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, that is Onias or the high priest, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown, and a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. In other words, there were priests, well, the high priest and other priests who were replaced by Antiochus Epiphanes with corrupt priests, and he trampled some of the pious and righteous priesthood and you know, like and trampled them, but he put other people in their place who were corrupt, is what he did. But it says here that it's because of transgression. In other words, because of transgression, the priesthood had become very corrupt at this point, and it became very corrupt by the time Jesus came too, which is why Jesus was warning the leadership at the time, you know, that your kingdom's going to be taken away and is going to be given to another. And John was on their case, you know, who told you to flee from the coming wrath. And we see it all through Luke, you know, like even Mary's song, it's that he's going to be the cause of the rising and falling of many in Israel. And so he's talking about taking the higher ups in Israel, bringing them down, and taking the lower downs and bringing them up. And that's kind of a repetition that you see between Daniel and between and what Christ does. And well, it's a big theme in the Bible. So because of transgression, Onias III was the pious high priest when Antiochus was in charge, or when Antiochus first took charge, right? But it was Onias's own brother Jason who wanted to be high priest, so he bribed Antiochus. And Antiochus had Onias removed and put Jason in his place. So his own brother, bribes Antiochus and does this. But then Onias has another brother named Menelaus, and he offered an even bigger bribe, and he replaced Jason, right? He comes along and he replaces Jason. So yeah, right. You know, it's just, you know, so in order to finance that bribe, because he promised a lot of money, Menelaus started selling off the golden utensils in the temple. You know, we've already talked about like the golden utensils and you know, like how the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar had taken the golden utensils out, and then and what's his grandson, I can't think of his name right now, who the writing on the wall king, my mind's gone blank on that, but you know, he goes and has a party in front of, in front of everybody using those golden utensils. And that's when he sees the writing on the wall, and Daniel comes in and interprets it and says, you're a dead man, and your kingdom's going to be handed over to another. It's kind of like one of those final straw things, Well, this happens where later on in the priesthood, you have all these shenanigans going on, and he starts selling the utensils the same utensils, basically, in order to bribe Antiochus Epiphanes so he can be high priest. So Onias, he rebukes him for this, rightfully, and Menelaus had Onias murdered. So he murders the high priest, and Jason got an army together to fight Menelaus because he wants the high priesthood back. And he's actually defeated by Antiochus, because what Antiochus does is he comes to Jerusalem in order to defend Menelaus. He's going to defend the person who gave him the highest bribe, and who gave him all these golden utensils from the temple and everything, and who had given, and so he actually defeats Jason. This is what's going on. That's why we're talking about because of transgression. So part of what's going on with this Antichrist figure, who Antiochus Epiphanes is because of transgression, because of apostasy, because of corruption. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is this vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate?" So he's blaming the transgression that makes it desolate, right? "And the giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot." We don't know who this Holy One is. Some people think that it is Christ himself giving the order and telling another one, but we don't know that. So there's two holy ones who are so angelic figures, or maybe even one of them, maybe even more than that, just an angelic figure. He says, the second one, he's asking, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering?" So he wants a timeline. He wants the transgression that makes desolate. It is this, it is the corruption that is bringing about a sort of judgment. That's what's making it desolate. So when we're talking about the abomination of desolation, even in the coming Antichrist, it's going to be connected with an apostasy. And I wonder if it's not an apostasy in the leadership of the church or something like that. So, and the abomination that caused desolation in AD 70 also had something to do with the corruption in the high priesthood and in the Sanhedrin system, scribes and Pharisees, and that whole lot. So he says to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." So we'll talk about these 2,300 evenings and mornings. There's two possibilities, okay? The evenings and mornings, we're talking about it's a reference probably to the evening sacrifice and the morning sacrifice. And so we're talking about 2,300 days altogether, or if you count the number of sacrifices as being 2,300, it could be 1,150 days. And either one of these interpretations could work. So we know that the temple was cleansed at the end of all of this on December 25th, 165 BC. I think it's interesting that it's December 25th as a side note, but I don't know, So, that working backwards, it would bring us to 171 BC as 2,300 days. That's when Antiochus Epiphanes rolled into Jerusalem in order to defend his bribing priest, right? Or it could be 1,150 days, which is 2,300 daily sacrifices, which just brings us to 168 BC, or the beginning of the Maccabean tribulation and revolt. So the Maccabees were the ones who it was these brothers. It's where you get the Sadducees from, basically. And the Maccabees were being persecuted by Antiochus Epiphanes, but they revolted, and they actually freed Judea, and that freedom lasted over 100 years. So they were in the middle of a Grecian empire, and there was an independent, not exactly state of Israel, but they kind of were able to do their own thing for a long time, you know. So the Maccabees became very popular because of this. They also proclaimed themselves as being priests and being, but they weren't really from the right line. They call themselves, Sadducees comes from the term Zadokites. So they called themselves Zadokites, but they weren't really from Zadok. So when you get to the first century, when Jesus is, during Jesus' days, you see two high priests at one point kind of being mentioned, or you see the situation where the people actually did not consider the high priest a high priest. They considered another one who they knew to be a Levite to be the actual high priest. So there was a perception by the people that was different from the thumb that they were under the Sadducees. So it was very corrupt in Jesus's day as well, in the first century. So this Maccabean tribulation and the revolt, it cleansed the temple. It's where you get Hanukkah from. And he restores the evening and morning sacrifices. You can read the sort of like the history or the tradition about it in the book of Maccabees, especially Second Maccabees, and that restoration of the temple is Jesus himself celebrated it. So when Jesus went to the Feast of Rededication, this is the event that that's based off.
So who were the priests that were put back in?
Well, what happened is and I forget, like, I think Judas Maccabees called himself a high priest, and then he put his brother as the high priest, and it became this whole nepotistic thing. And then they started like collecting taxes from the people, and they ended up like kind of like getting their land out from under them, and people were living in poverty while they were living high on the hog, and they were an aristocracy basically. So it's a thing that kind of turned ugly, and the people after a while didn't like them either. So on one hand, the Maccabees, could have been popular because of their defeat of Antiochus Epiphanes, but on the other hand, they had their own treachery too, and their own, they kind of put the people under their thumb instead. Yeah, it is kind of like judges, exactly, So 2,300 years. Now, there has been interpretation. If you look at Adam Clarke, who lived in 1762 and 1832, I think some of his commentaries you can find on that Blue Letter Bible or the Bible Gateway, where you find Matthew Henry and all these other older commentators. But he was a Methodist preacher and a commentator. He interpreted it as 2,300 years. He thought for some reason it should be translated as 2,300 years. And so what happened is that William Miller, who kind of was a contemporary of his, he's a Baptist preacher who also interpreted this way. And he used Cyrus's decree to rebuild the temple, because there's a date given for that, I guess, I guess you can figure that out from later on in Daniel. We'll get there as well. But he came to a date in 1844 where they expected the Lord's advent. So you had all these people gathered in Times Square waiting for Jesus to come back. And yeah, 1844. And they call them the Millerites. He and his followers, they kind of gathered there. It turned into what they call the big disappointment. And then instead of like just admitting that they were wrong, some of them said, well, he cleansed the temple, which means that he's chosen certain people, but like they're the last generation. And it's out of this Millerism that you get two big movements from this, which are the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Seventh-day Adventists. They have their history off of this William Miller thing. Yeah, it started kind of like two sort of cults, or or semi, I don't, Seventh-day Adventists, at least it's kind of a semi-cult, with that. And so like if you, I got into a big discussion once with a Jehovah's Witness who was very educated in Jehovah's Witness, by the way, but he started off his little argument with 1844, and I didn't really even know what he was talking about at the time, but it came from this. And then Seventh-day Adventists took it somewhere else. They were looking at, they were like, well, we're looking for a different Advent or something like that. I don't know, don't quote me on any of that, but that's something you can, dig up, but that's the starting point right here. So again, bad interpretation of Daniel, and you get like two different. Yeah, here's like a chart that Miller had about like I've seen this before. That it's got all this like what's supposed to happen and everything. This is from the 1800s. So verses 15 through 17. When I, Daniel, had seen this vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. So at first you think, well, maybe is this an appearance of the Son of Man? But it's not. It's actually an angel. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai. So another man's voice. Again, some people think this might be Christ himself. I don't know. I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai Canal, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So now you have Gabriel coming. It's turning out that it's Gabriel that's going to explain this vision to Daniel. So he came near to where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said, understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end, and he made me stand up. This is, I underline or highlighted here, time of the end, because everything that he's going to explain from here on out, for the most part, you're going to say, well, this already happened. But we're going to see that it's probably got like, it's got two fulfillments in it.
How did you wear that before then and now?
Yeah, already, but not yet.
Already?
Yeah, already, but not yet. There's a lot of things that are ready, but not yet. But it's going to focus, he's going to focus here on the Greek and the Persian empires. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw, it had with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia, and the goat is the king of Greece. The word is actually Javan, probably because I don't know if there was no Greek empire in any case when Daniel was seeing this vision, but Javan is an area that would later be dominated by Greece or be part of the Grecian Empire, but it's modern day Turkey. So there are some interpretations here where some people are thinking, well, what if we see modern day Iran attacking a lot of the rest of the Middle East, including the areas of Israel and going into Egypt, attacking eastwards all the way into Turkey, and then somebody like Erdogan with a counterattack, and then Erdogan getting his paws on Israel. So it's speculation, you know. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's something to keep in mind. That's all. So, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. That's who some people are thinking, well, it could be Erdogan, but in this case, it's the first king we're talking about is Alexander, right? As for the horn that was broken, in the place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. Nobody became as powerful as Alexander the Great, not in the Grecian Empire. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors, so again, you have this apostasy, have reached their limit, a king of a bold face, who's Antiochus, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. There's not just a demonic power behind somebody like Antiochus Epiphanes, but as we saw, above any kind of power and authority, there's always God. And there's, including Nebuchadnezzar himself, no ruler is rises to power without God giving the go-ahead. And so that's what we have seen from Daniel so far. Even with Darius, you know, there's prophecies about Darius that say, you know, I've called you by name, and see, I've made it so that you've become successful, basically. And it's God talking to Cyrus. So his power shall be great, but not by his own power, and he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are saints. Saints meaning holy ones, the people who are holy ones. So you have, every time you see saints, it's where we translate it into saints, because we see holy ones, but if we know that they're talking about people in English, they'll say saints. If they're talking about holy ones and they're angelic beings, it might say angels. Okay. But again, it's the same sort of phrase, holy ones. By his cunning, he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and his own mind he shall become great. Without warning, he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes. You're thinking the prince of princes, and I've seen a lot of commentator cite Onias, the high priest, as being the prince of princes. So that's one interpretation of it. And he shall be broken, but by no human hand. He died of a disease. There wasn't a person who killed Antiochus. The vision of the evening and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. So I'm going back to Guzik notes on this. So in the latter time of their kingdom, so this prophecy in this passage reads equally true both of Antiochus and an Antichrist. So this is an example of a prophetic passage that has both near and far fulfillment. It's a good way to put it. Having fierce features, Antiochus Epiphanes is known for his cruel brutality. This will also be true of the coming Antichrist, who will also be very brutal. He understands sinister schemes through his cunning. Antiochus was known for his flattery and smooth tongue. The coming Antichrist will strike a covenant with Israel. I'm not sure that that's correct. Okay. But we'll get there in Daniel 9. In fact, I think he's wrong about this. His power shall, but it is a common interpretation of that passage. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. So Antiochus Epiphanes was empowered by Satan and allowed by God. Kind of like what I had just said, I guess. The same will be true of the coming Antichrist. He will prosper and thrive, and Antiochus Epiphanes look like a total success, the coming Antichrist will look like a complete winner until God topples his reign. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy temple. Antiochus Epiphanes not only destroyed his enemies, but he also harshly persecuted the people of God. And for me, namely, also that he slaughtered a bunch of priests. The coming Antichrist will also destroy and persecute. He shall cause deceit to prosper. Both the rule of Antiochus Epiphanes in the past and the Antichrist in the future are marked by deceit. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be deceived. The coming of the lawless one, this is coming from 2 Thessalonians 2:9. The coming of the lawless one is according to the works of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. So there's going the ones who apostatize are also going to be deceived, and many people are going to be deceived. He shall exalt himself in his heart. So in Antiochus Epiphanes' day, the coins that he had were inscribed with this: Theos Epiphanes, meaning God manifest. This is almost kind of like typical of like what Roman, Caesars used to do. But so he's calling himself God manifest. The coming Antichrist will also exalt himself in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This does not need to be a literal temple that has to be rebuilt in Jerusalem or anything. I don't think that we're looking for a temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem myself. He shall even rise against the prince of princes. So though Antiochus Epiphanes hated the people of God and fought against them, it was really because he hated God. So he sees it as prince of princes as God himself. I guess, I don't know. The same will be true of the coming Antichrist, who will hate the Jews because he hates God. He will hate the Jews who fear God, but he is going to hate people who believe in Christ, period. So because he hates God. And yeah, I do think that there is some weird demonic hatred against Jews as well. Broken by no human means. So history tells us Antiochus Epiphanes died of a disease, not by the hand of man. And so in a similar way, no man will defeat the coming Antichrist, but the hand of Jesus will strike him down, which is recorded in Revelation 19:20. Therefore, seal up the vision. Daniel must do this because in his day, the vision referred to a period far distant in its ultimate fulfillment. For us, the time is near, Revelation 1:3, and the book is unsealed. So Revelation 22:10. And I thought one of the last things I'd look at here is that section in Thessalonians 2, kind of taking what we have in mind from Daniel 8. It says, now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, which you also see in Daniel 7, the Son of Man gathering his, people ruling with the Son of Man figure in Daniel 7. We ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or a spoken word or a letter seeming to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. He's telling them the day of the Lord has not come. Let no one deceive you in any way. That day will not come unless the rebellion comes first. That word is apostasia, okay? And it means apostasy. It's kind of what we see with the transgression. There's going to be a falling away. That comes first, just like we had an apostasy in the in the priesthood in Antiochus Epiphanes' day. That comes first. And the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes the seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. There are all these depictions in the Old Testament of, people who thought they were bigger than they were, thought themselves as a god or something like that, including Antiochus Epiphanes, who, called himself God manifest. But we saw it also with the king of Tyre, the king of Babylon. The king of Tyre, thought himself like, I'm going to ascend to the mountain of God, and I'm going to take the throne and that sort of thing. And it's just kind of like the way Satan thinks, that he's going to rule, rule over everybody. But it's basically, like man, it goes all the way back to the first page of the Bible, first couple pages where man wants to rule and be like God. So the Antichrist is all those who will not repent from Adam and Eve's sort of original sin of pride and wanting to be like God, even though they were made in the image of God, which is a great irony. So verses 18 through 27, finally. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision, and that I did not understand it. So just a couple closing comments. The New Testament does not go into specifics of the area of the world or the time in history or anything that, say, like this vision of Daniel does. So I think sometimes if we're looking for another event in maybe the former Medo-Persian Empire, or the former, Turkey or Greece or something like that, we may be barking up the wrong tree, because I think the point is more about the apostasy, how God is going to bring judgment on false leadership, and just false religion in Christianity or Judaism or whatever. And but at the same time, he's also going to bring judgment ultimately on the person who's the Antichrist figure, and anybody who follows them. So it could mean that this is open, not necessarily, like a specific place in the world or a specific time. So we do see the repetition of some of these key themes. First of all, that there is a preceding transgression or apostasy, maybe a corruption in leadership that precedes the Antichrist figure. Then we have stars. In other words, the remnant, which is persecuted because of the stars, or the saints are cast down. So when you look at Revelation 12 with the dragon taking a third of the stars and throwing them down to the earth, the cross reference for that is Daniel 8. It's right where we are here, and you see that all over a lot of commentaries. There have been some people who have interpreted that as Satan at the beginning of time deceiving the rest, a third of the angels to come with him, but that's nowhere in scripture other than if you take Revelation 12 and interpret it that way. So you also see a lot of commentaries that like look at Daniel 8 and say this is, the casting down of the saints, or the persecution of the saints. So I grew up with the whole idea that like that dragon throwing the stars down was Satan deceiving a bunch of angels and getting them to follow him. But so I was used to that idea for a long time. But taking a closer look at Revelation 12, I think that everything in Revelation is there's a cross reference in the Old Testament, and this is kind of like Daniel chapter 8 is where Revelation 12 is referring to, I believe. So God brings death to the Antichrist figure, and then the temple, where's the temple now? Where's the temple? It's us, right? Makes you think about this a little bit, the temple or the saints are restored, and as a rule, in chapter 7, the sacrifice isn't going to go anywhere, because we have one sacrifice for all time for us, that we there's no reason to think of a rebuilt temple in Israel as being the holy place, and that there needs to be a restoration of the daily sacrifices. Why would you bring the old covenant back with everything that Hebrews has taught us, and everything that Paul has said about it, and early Christians being persecuted over something like that, So when we get to the temple language in the New Testament, it does refer to the body of saints, and us being the blocks in the temples being made not of human hands. And what does it mean if that gets desecrated? I don't know. So, but that's more of where I would look at, rather than speculating about